I'm going to bring in Kingsley Hamilton now. And I can remember quite clearly the last time we spoke, it was in May last year. And I can remember asking him if Khan's re-election was a sort of mandate for ULEZ expansion. And here's what he had to say then.
In some ways, yes. Obviously, I don't like it. Yeah. I don't like it. I mean, we do a lot of protests. I want to say I'm not the only sort of organiser. There's a few other organisers within the anti-ULEZ movement, but we protest the ULEZ because we didn't like it. But I think we can't protest democracy. We can't protest the result of the vote, because the way to protest a vote is to vote. It's as simple as that. And quite frankly, we lost.
I have to say, I thoroughly enjoyed my conversation with Kingsley Hamilton last time we spoke, and looking forward to talking to him again today. Morning, Kingsley.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you, sir. I'm good. And I just always remember you standing out as someone who actually cherishes democracy, which is a nice thing to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the problem with our current democratic system is our first past the post system, and the one size fits all. So as much as you said about Sadiq Khan winning the election, obviously Outer London did vote predominantly against ULEZ. Inner London voted for ULEZ, if you like. But of course, it's first past the post. The majority takes it all. My issue, and I'm actually quite pleased to be, you're not going to be surprised to hear this from me, I'm quite pleased to hear that pollution levels have been dropping in certain areas, and that's fantastic news. I'm not anti-clean air, and as much as I hate it, I don't like being called a tinfoil hatter, because I'm not anti-clean air. I just want the nitty-gritty of these policies to be looked at properly, because then you can take out the unfair. So I'm not action against ULEZ, I'm against action against unfair ULEZ. There are other organisations, but I'm against unfair run ULEZ. And the reason it's unfair is because we're not looking at the secondary unintended consequences that people have to deal with.
Now, I think that's a fair point. I do think that's a fair point. But if we have to rank all our concerns, does clean air trump any of the other concerns that we might have? Is that not the number? I mean, I'm now, maybe a few years ago I'd have a different view, but now a father of a 6-year-old little girl, clean air matters more to me perhaps than it used to.
Mike, you'll be surprised to hear my son has PCD, primary ciliary dyskinesia, a breathing disorder, where his lungs aren't being cleaned out by the natural ciliary hairs. So I'm absolutely in favour of clean air. But just saying, here you go, I've got a scheme. Anyone want to vote for it? Yeah, of course we'll vote for it. Well, do you want to look at it? Do you want to look at how it works? Do you want to see if it actually does work? So the nitty-gritty of the actual policies should be taken into account. Now, my problems with ULEZ was the NIMBY, the way it's almost like a NIMBY policy, and I'll explain it. I've never had the opportunity to explain this, so thank you for giving me the opportunity. Central London's ULEZ, 100% it worked. The reason it worked is because we've got a really good transport network. People were dissuaded from using their cars. But the crucial thing is they weren't forced to sell their cars because they got a 90% discount from the ULEZ. So it's a bit like the 5p carrier bag charge. People were told, you're going to have to pay £1.25, not £12.50 to use your car. Well, I'll just use it less. So they don't sell it. And that's really important that they remember they use it less and don't sell it. In Middle London, the same happened. When the ULEZ was expanded to Outer London, Sadiq Khan said, no residence discount, tough, you've got to pay £12.50 a day. Now, that made an exodus of people sell their cars.
Fair point.
There was the scrappage scheme, but it was very poor compared to the value of people's vehicles. So what you've got now is you've got a situation where Mr. Smith, who lives in Tooting, for example, he's got a tube station down the road, walking distance. The schools are walking distance. The supermarkets are walking distance. If he had to pay a £1.25 charge, he'd probably keep his car, but use it less. But because he's got to pay £12.50, he's now going to sell it. And he did sell it, but he didn't sell it to somebody else in Tooting. He sold it to someone in the countryside where the schools are 20 miles or 10 miles away. The nearest train station's 5 miles away. The nearest supermarket's 5 miles away, and the local shop closes at 6 o'clock. So you have to drive far out of town. So that polluting car that's polluting is now polluting even more because it's in the countryside. So my problem isn't with the perception of clean air. I absolutely want clean air. But what I wanted was discussion, proper, real democracy, where we can actually sit down and say, right, This is what's wrong with ULEZ. Can we fix it? And I spoke to you previously about motorcycles.
Yes.
They are not automatically compliant. They should automatically be compliant, because the only reason the data isn't on the logbook is because the emissions were too low. It wasn't worth recording. So Sadiq Khan, rather than using that common sense, he said, oh, well, because there's no data on the logbook, we have to presume that a C90, the most efficient bike in the world, by the way, is not compliant with ULEZ. But you can pay TfL's partner £175 to prove that it's compliant. Now, this hits another problem. So people look after their, some people do look after their cars and some people don't. The ones who don't look after their car, they don't get them serviced regularly and they smoke like hell, they should quite rightly be penalised because they need to look after their vehicles. The people who do look after their cars have no avenue to go to get their vehicle tested to say, hey, look, can I have what's called an RPC? Now, an RPC is a reduced pollution certificate. They do them for buses and coaches and lorries, or they used to anyway when ULEZ was a thing. I don't think they do them anymore. But reduced pollution certificate was a facility where you could get your vehicle tested to say, look, I've got my vehicle serviced every year. I change the oil regularly. I do all the things that are necessary to keep the emissions down. I don't use leaded petrol anymore, for example.
Kingsley, you all of your points.
There's just no avenue. That's all we're asking for. We're asking for fairness and discussion. I would love Sadiq Khan to just have a chat with me. I'll quite happily shake his hand and be quite polite to him, just talk to him about my concerns and our members' concerns. And we've got to over 80,000 members, plus many who just follow our groups and listen to what we've got to say.
I have to say, Kingsley, I think you've made, and I like the cut of your jib. We've spoken before, and I think the points you raise, all of those are valid. Just by way of, in fact, I think just by way of a last thought, on balance, and no government policy is ever perfect. On balance, is it the right policy for London? It needs improving, but on balance.
I'll tell you another flaw with ULEZ as opposed to other clean air zones. And the reason is because other clean air zones in the country take their emissions data from the actual emissions of the vehicle as opposed to the age of the vehicle.
I hear you.
Now, ULEZ is predominantly done on the age of the vehicle, so it's Euro 5, Euro 6. So it's Euro 6 for diesels and it's Euro 4 for petrol. Now, that's too much of a blanket line to draw.
Kingsley, forgive me, I've got to wrap up. I've gone massively over as it is, but I do enjoy listening to what you have to say, and I think there is a truth to all the points you raised. It's not a perfect policy, but it is keeping Londoners healthier than they were before. Your thoughts to come, plus